Welcome back to the History of Early Western Civilization. This is Professor Allen, and here is Lecture Day 13. So, if you recall at the end of last lecture video, I ended up mentioning that the next few videos and few lectures are going to actually start detailing the various Roman civil wars and what leads to each of them. And we end up having several of these wars in succession with small gaps in time between. And you'll notice a couple common things behind these civil wars. One is that many of them are caused by the political strife in Rome at the time, as in the political division, whether it was a class-based issue or even just a politics-based issue. And then the second commonality between most of these civil wars is most of them have usually one or two or more driving personalities behind it, okay? Personalities as in people driving these civil wars, usually wanting more power or trying to stop others from trying to get that power. And so let's talk a little bit about the background of the period leading into these civil wars. And we're going to pick up right where we left off last time, with the Punic War, the Third Punic War ending, and the Fourth Macedonian War ending over here, and the Third Punic War ending over here. And as you can see, Rome has expanded quite a lot from its original tiny little town here in 753 BC, and about 600 years later, it's a Mediterranean superpower, okay? And due to all of this expansion, there is tons of new territory. Well, with that new territory, right, we end up having tons of new people brought into the Republic. And many of these people, when a new area is conquered, those people are made slaves originally. And sometimes they're able to buy themselves out of slavery, sometimes not. And the same thing happens with the unemployed and the people that fall into debt. Sometimes they are able to work off that slavery and slavery debt and become free again. Sometimes they are not. And so, regardless of this, and regardless of the cause of slavery in the Republic, one of those two main reasons, right, are now tons of slaves across the entire Republic. And this causes massive unemployment among the plebeian people, the main working class of the Romans, as well as the freemen, which are the class of group of people that are also working class, but then they're ones that aren't necessarily able to have any voting rights or any kind of Latin rights, right? Okay? And so those two groups of people, many of them are now becoming unemployed throughout not just the Italian peninsula, but all of these areas that are controlled by Rome. And this amount of unemployment, as well as other issues, such as the slaves themselves being upset, we end up having a massive amount of severe unrest, okay? People are not happy. The slaves, as well as these out-of-work Romans, are very unhappy. And so let's talk a little bit about some more of the unrest and one of the other causes for this unrest. And that cause of unrest is the end of the small farmer. So what's the small farmer? Well, it's obviously not small or short people or anything like that are farmers, right? No, I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning people that own very small farms, okay? People that are the typically regular working plebeian class people that have maybe a few acres, okay? Maybe even just an acre of land for farming, okay? And while 1 acre isn't really enough, it might be all they have, and it might supplement their regular income some other way. But regular farmers are probably going to have maybe anywhere between, say, 5 and 20 acres, okay, is what we're talking about. Maybe even a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but not massive farms, okay? These are small farms. And during this period of time, many of these people start falling on hard times on their own. If there's a bad harvest, maybe they aren't able to make ends meet and they end up going into some sort of debt or something. And instead of realizing that they might lose everything and go into full debt, they decide, let's sell part of their land or even all of their land to someone that has money and can bail them out. And typically, those people that are bailing them out, or at least buying up this land, are typically rich patricians. Remember, the aristocratic level of society in Rome are the patricians. And these patricians start loving this idea of buying farmland from these poor farm owners. And eventually, the patricians start realizing that this is the best way to increase their wealth, because many patricians eventually go on to become members of the Senate. And one of the rules of the Senate is that if you became a senator, you could not have like a real main job, okay? Because they didn't want it interfering with things, such as if it was a business and you were to maybe make like a deal in the Senate that benefited business owners, then you would be possibly benefiting from that deal as well, okay? And so that wasn't allowed, and they decided that the only way to stop that kind of thing from happening is just do not allow senators to have real jobs. And so one of the only occupations allowed by senators was to be a farmer. And so many of them went into the farming of olives or grapes, just like it happened in Greece, but also other farming crops as well. And this ended up becoming very, very popular amongst the patricians. Many of these patricians, when they bought the farm from these other poor plebeian farmers, the plebeians thought that, oh, I'm going to get hired on as a worker on my former farm, okay? That was not the case. The patrician might have alluded to that idea, maybe even not, and then just ends up hiring a slave, or buying a slave instead, or hiring other workers to work even more cheaply than those. And so eventually these patricians end up buying up tons and tons of the farm throughout the Italian peninsula, okay, because this is where most of the patricians live, and they're buying up land all throughout this area right here, actually all the way down to here as well. And the patricians are becoming very rich off of this, because they're basically now having multi-hundred-acre or even up to several thousand acres plantation-sized farms. And they're hiring slaves to do all the work, or buying slaves to do all the work. Many of these now out-of-work poor farmers, the small farm owners, have nowhere else to go in the countryside. So many of them flock to the cities, hoping to find work in the cities. Well, when they get to the cities, they find out what's going on there. Population in the cities is booming. Population if the city of Rome reaches 1 million people, which for an ancient city is massive. Okay? Massive, massive city. Cities today are, sometimes multi-million style numbers. Okay? And so it's not really big compared to some of the cities today. It's still relatively big. Okay? 1 million people. Well, the problem isn't just the number of people living in these cities, is that the patricians and also the rich in the cities are also hiring slaves, or buying slaves rather, to fill all the jobs for the regular workers that they might have. Regular servants and things like that are now not being hired. They're being instead replaced by slaves from all of these other areas of the Republic, okay? And so these out-of-work farmers that come to the cities throughout the Italian peninsula and elsewhere find no jobs to be had for them either. And so you end up having the urban poor that were now basically losing their jobs to slaves, and now the rural poor from the farms coming to the cities and becoming new members of the urban poor, and also finding out the same problem, that there's no jobs. So there's massive unemployment throughout the cities. And this is going to start causing a lot of problems. And one thing that Rome used to do was they used to have like this basically welfare kind of thing where they would give bread to people, okay? There would be like a small little bread stipend for everybody, so they wouldn't starve. Well, over time, there was more and more people needing this food because of this high unemployment, and the amount of money in this fund for the bread, and the amount of bread being given out in these places, like these bakery places, basically welfare, almost the equivalent of food stamps, we're only having the same amount of bread, but there's now more people. And so you've got a lot of people now being very hungry throughout the cities as well. And that's going to cause issues. Well, eventually, in the year 133, a man is going to be elected as plebeian tribune. Who is that man? Well, that man is one of these two brothers. Don't worry about which is which. But that man is Tiberius Gracchus. Okay, he and his brother, okay, his younger brother, are together known as the Gracchi. Okay, the Gracchi, plural of Gracchus, right? And so Tiberius Gracchus is one of these two men. He lived from around 169 or 164, okay, which is why there's the dash slash there and then the 4, and it's circa. We're not exactly sure which of those two dates, and maybe even between them. And he died in the year 133. Okay, he was born in 169 or 164, somewhere between, and he lived until 133 BCE. Well, in 133 BCE, the same year he dies, foreshadowing, he is elected as plebeian tribune. Well, what's plebeian tribune? We've already talked about that, but as a quick recap, a plebeian tribune is the head of the plebeian assembly, and it's kind of like the plebeian version of the consuls. Remember, the consuls are patricians that are elected to office, and they are the leaders of the republic, okay? They both serve for 1 year, and they have power of veto and tons of other powers. Well, the plebeian tribune is very similar to that, except for they don't have the military ruling or leadership part like the consuls do, okay? And the plebeian tribune also has the power of veto and the powers to push laws. Well, Tiberius Gracchus gets elected to that position, okay? And he immediately comes up with a plan how to fix the poor in the cities. And the idea is, let's make some land reforms. And these land reforms are very important. And what he wants to do is he wants to give the urban poor, okay, the poor people that are living in the cities, a little bit of land out throughout the Italian countryside. And maybe elsewhere in the rest of the Republic, okay? And he has this idea that if you do that, then they can farm for themselves and they're not going to have to be being fed by the government. They're not going to be having to possibly fall into debt slavery. They're not going to be more slaves. We're going to be able to be okay with these people taking care of themselves. They'll be able to feed themselves and no longer be poor in the cities. Okay, they'll be out in the countryside and having their own lives and being able to survive on this little bit of land we give them, or the government gives them. And to do this, he thinks that there should be a limit on the amount of land that any one person can have. And that amount of land should be only 300 acres per person. So if a patrician has multiple thousands of acres on their giant patrician plantation, they're going to have to lose that land. Unless they are married, of course, that would get an extra 300 acres, right? Them 300 and their wife 300 acres each. And then 150 acres per child. And so if you've got 2 children and you're married, that means there's 2 people, that's 600 acres, plus 2 children is another 300 acres total. So that's 900 acres for that one patrician. That's a pretty good sized farm, right? Or plantation. Maybe not as massive as these multiple high-sized ones that they were used to having, and that some of them are even well into the thousands of acres, but it's still pretty good. And so Tiberius Gracchus thinks that will end up being okay, and that the patricians in the Senate will agree to this. He also comes up with the idea that at this time, okay, and how it already had been beforehand, is the only way to serve in the military is you had to own land. If you wanted to serve in the Roman military, you had to already previously own land. If you didn't, then you can't join the military at all. And so he suggests, because of these land reforms, giving a bunch of poor people of the urban population farmland, okay, even just a little bit of land, it makes them eligible to serve in the army, which will, in some way, maybe increase the size of Rome's armies, and maybe Rome can go off and conquer more territory. So he figures this is a very kind of patriotic idea to get the patricians behind it, because the patricians love using the army to take over other land, okay? And so we end up having this suggestion by Tiberius Gracchus. And the Senate's response is, we like this, but we don't like this. And because we don't want to give up our land, there's just not going to be any land anywhere throughout Italy, and that there's already other land spoken for elsewhere, for other people, so you're just not going to be able to do this. It's just not going to work. And so he tries pushing it through anyway, and it passes in the plebeian assembly, but the Senate again stops it, and when he pushes the issue even more and tries to suggest it again and again and again, the Senate ends up accusing him of wanting to be a dictator and trying to take power, which isn't true. It's just not true. But they accuse him of it, and they accuse him of trying to get more power, and that he's going to be using this idea of becoming very popular with the urban poor and getting all this land, as well as trying to increase the size of the military to possibly force himself into being a dictatorial position and get powers of the dictatorship. And so he is accused of being basically dangerous, and eventually, while walking down the streets in Rome on his way to, I believe, the plebeian assembly house, or home from it, or going home from it, one of the way, he is actually attacked in the middle of the street by a regular random Roman citizen that has listened to the Senate's accusations against him being a dictator and bought into that idea and is murdered by that person attacking him. A regular person kills him, thinking that he does want to be a dictator, okay? And so it's a very scary time when you end up having basically the government kind of saying, oh, well, that person's dangerous and wants this all. It's not true, but people believe it. And then when they believe it, they act on it, and someone ends up dying because of it. Very scary times when that kind of thing happens. Well, about 10 years later, oh, and that also happened in the year 133, obviously, right? He was only plebeian tribune for that year. And when he was accused, it was that same year. And he is killed in 133 BCE. Well, 10 years later, his younger brother, who was born in 154 BCE and lived to the year 121 BCE, is Gaius, okay, the other one. And so we have Gaius Gracchus. He happens to run for plebeian tribune 10 years after his older brother did, and after his older brother died. And he is successfully elected to be plebeian tribune in 123 BCE. And when he gets into office, he realizes that land reform idea might not necessarily be the best way to go. Let's try another idea. And he suggests citizenship for all, meaning all of those free men, the people that don't have citizenship rights, would become citizens. And that right there really upsets the patrician elite, because the patricians rely on votes, and they rely on votes in some cases for themselves, okay? That patricians will typically vote for them, as well as plebeians and equestrians as well. And now, if all these other people are getting to vote, they might lose some power. And they're not going to necessarily lose their Senate seats, because only patricians can get in the Senate. But what they would lose is the plebeian assembly would have to be bigger, based on the number of new regular citizens. And they're worried that they will lose power in upcoming elections and things like that, and where the patricians are less important in society than the regular plebeians. And so they don't like that idea. And over time, there is a revolt in the city when the patricians block these measures and block this idea that Gaius comes up with. There is a full-on revolt in the city of Rome, the capital city. And many of the plebeians and the freemen are on the side of Gaius Gracchus, pushing for this revolt. Gaius isn't necessarily responsible for this revolt, but they are using him as a figurehead and saying, yes, we love Gaius, we want him to basically be our leader. And Gaius is accused of being an enemy of the state by the Senate. He is flat out declared as an enemy of the state in a Senate decree. Gaius, along with 3,000 of his followers, are basically put on wanted lists as criminals, and we end up having a bit of riots in the street along with the revolt, and during these riots, 3,000 of Gaius's followers and Gaius himself are captured and imprisoned and executed after trial. And it doesn't really matter that Gaius was kind of not fully responsible, but finally in 121 BCE, after 2 years after basically all of this issue going down, he is executed. This is going to result in major division of the Senate, because there were members of the Senate, patricians, remember, that did not agree to Gaius being executed, or Gaius even being declared as an enemy of the state. Some of them wanted to have a peaceful resolution, and started realizing we need to start maybe talking with the plebeians, otherwise we're going to have an even bigger revolt. And so we have a Senate division, and the Senate division is not quite political parties forming, but basically political parties forming. Now, people wouldn't say they were optimate or populari. You didn't have to declare it on any written thing, like a real political party. But people kind of understood where you kind of stood on the issues. And so you end up having these two semi-political parties created in the Senate. And they are the optimates and the populares. So let's talk about each very quickly, and then we'll end this video and move on to the next video with another subject related to this. The optimates are called the best men, okay? The optimates means the best men. They were conservative patrician politicians. Both of these are patricians, by the way, okay? They're conservative patrician politicians in the Senate who support a government in the hands of the patricians, okay? And they want to push patrician ideas and more patrician power. They built networks of allies of up-and-coming young new patrician politicians to maintain the status quo. They don't want things changing. Okay, the status quo is how things are, okay, and they want that to stay. They don't want things changing. They want the Senate in charge, basically as it is, and everybody else kind of just being there. They want all the power. And again, they're going to work with other patricians to make this happen as much as possible, with Senate decrees and things like that. The populares are the other semi-political party that forms. And they are the popular party, obviously, right, is what the name is, okay? And they are, again, patrician politicians, and they look towards the common citizens, the plebeians, for support. And they kind of realize the best way to do that is by building the networks of allies of plebeians by trading favors for supporting reforms, and saying that, hey, plebeian assembly members, if you pass this idea that helps some of us, then we'll make sure that one of the things that you pass is then passed in return. So kind of like, we'll scratch your back if you scratch our back kind of thing. And they always love to make sure that the plebeian assembly is handled with this, okay? And that the plebeians themselves are always going to be supporting it. Because if you can get all the regular people on board of something, then it's great. Even if it's not fully only benefiting them, if it benefits even some of the patricians at times, that's okay, as long as it looks like it will support the plebeians too. And so sometimes it is helping the plebeians, and sometimes it just looks like it does, but it's a little bit better than nothing, which is what the optimates want. And so you end up having the division between these two political parties, or semi-political parties. They're just not official. And so we will talk about some of that coming up in the next video.